Bibles, open to Galatians chapter 4. Galatians chapter 4. So I went back this morning and thought, when did we start Galatians? And we started back in August. And so we're not moving super fast, but we're not moving super slow. We are taking our time to make sure that we really do understand what is God's word saying. What does God want us to know from this incredible book? And so we are in Galatians chapter 4. We're going to start reading in verse 1. So if you are able, will you please stand as we recognize through our posture that these words are the words of God. Galatians chapter 4, starting in verse 1. God's word says, I mean that the heir, as long as he is a child, is no different from a slave, though he is the owner of everything. But he's under guardians and managers until this date set by his father. In the same way, we also, when we were children, were enslaved to the elementary principles of the world. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. But now you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God. How can you turn back to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I am afraid I may have labored over you in vain. That is God's word. You may be seated. As you are, let's pray together one more time. God, this is a very sobering passage this morning. It confronts us with life and death. It confronts us with heaven and hell. It confronts us with choices that we're actively making at this moment. And so, God, I pray that you would be gracious to us and that by your Spirit you would allow us to know your truth, that you would allow us to see how that truth should and actually is impacting our lives, and that you would allow that truth to change us, transform us, and make us people who look more like your Son than we did when we came here this morning. God, please do that in our midst as we sit under the teaching of your word and do the same thing at Evident Life Church this morning as well. Pastor Eric's going to be preaching this morning. Use him powerfully, please, at that church right on Gilbert Road, right in the downtown, such a strategically important place for a church in order to reach the thousands that go to the downtown area every day. God, use him to mobilize and to strategize to reach the lost in that community. Use him to sanctify your people through the preaching of your word. God, make much of Christ in Eric's preaching this morning. Make much of Christ in the preaching of Galatians 4 here this morning too, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. So if you have spent any time on YouTube, you've seen a phenomena that's taken place over the past couple of years. There are these videos on there that say something like this: humans can do the most amazing things. Have you seen those? And have people doing amazing feats of physical wonder, jumping over cars and on their snowboards, taking off cliffs and landing it perfectly, doing multiple backflips, forward flips, throwing basketballs off of the Grand Canyon and swishing it in a basketball hoop hundreds of feet away. Like all of these incredible things. And you watch these videos, you stand in awe of what people can do. And then oftentimes on the same page, you have these compilation called failed videos. Yes, you're laughing because you've seen those. You have people attempting to do incredible feats of physical wonder only to fail, only to have the car hit them, while they're trying to jump over it, only trying to make the jump, and instead of making the jump, crashing into the other side, and so on and so forth. We've seen all of this. Millions of people like watching people flirt with disaster. And it seems like many more millions like watching people get hit in the face by disaster. Now, we've been making our way through Galatians, like I said, since August, and what we've seen week after week after week is that the Galatians were flirting with disaster. This isn't physical disaster, though. No, they were flirting with the disaster of apostasy. Now, much of the New Testament is concerned with the danger of apostasy. Galatians, the book we've been going through, is no different than that. False teachers invade churches. They are disguised as Christians who teach the truth of God's word. They are wolves in sheep's clothing, as Jesus told us. They look like Christians. They sound like Christians. They act like Christians, but they are anything but Christians. A false teacher could be here this morning. A false teacher could be joining your growth group. Could be offering to teach our kids in the kids ministry. Could be excited about jumping in to lead a small group with our students. So you and I need to be able to spot them, because their goal is to transplant you from the good soil of God's word into the rotten, dead soil of heresy. This is what they do. This is their goal. This is the satanic plan for why they exist. So, and what does a false teacher do? A false teacher denies the Trinity. A false teacher denies the eternal deity of Jesus. A false teacher denies the deity of the Holy Spirit, and that they say he's not even a person. He's just some active force. They deny the virgin birth. They deny that Jesus died for sins as a substitute. They deny that he rose again physically. They deny that salvation is a free gift of God's grace given simply to those who believe in Jesus apart from good works. They deny that Christians need to live holy lives after salvation. Many false teachers in our day, they rely on things like false signs and wonders. They rely on made-up visions and dreams and so-called words from the Lord. They're greedy for money. And as we've seen in Paul's example in Galatians, Christians should never tolerate false teachers. They should be removed as quickly as possible before they infect the body. They have these deadly doctrinal diseases that they're carriers of, and they spread it to other people. Now, as I've told you before, false teaching, false teachers, spoken of in 26 of the 27 books of the New Testament. So only God, Jesus, and love are talked about more in the New Testament than false teachers. So their goal for people in church, the reason they infiltrate and invade churches, is to cause apostasy. Now, if you're not familiar with what that word means, we should be. The word apostasy means a person's complete abandonment of their commitment to Christ. They seem to have a commitment. Outwardly, they've made a commitment to Jesus. They've shown signs of conversion, but they leave and they never come back. That's apostasy. This refers to the almost Christian, the counterfeit Christian, to the person who's committed to Jesus for a little while, but then, like I said, leaves and never comes back. It's in the words of 1 John 2:19. They went out from us, but they left us. They left the teaching of the apostles. They left the churches that they started based on those teachings. John says they went out from us, but they were not of us. They weren't really a part of us. Because if they had been a part of us, if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. So if apostasy threatened the churches that started after Jesus' resurrection, if apostasy threatened the churches that were planted and taught by apostles, then you and I have to remember, you and I have to keep in mind that apostasy is a clear and present danger here at Redeemer. So if you're in Galatians 4, I want you to turn to the book of Jude. Jude, right before the book of Revelation, the 26th book of the New Testament, page 1127 in the Bibles that the ushers passed out. 1127. You have a target on your back, and apostasy is a real danger for you, and apostasy is a real danger for me. When people ask me, Pastor, how can I pray for you? It always comes back to this: pray that I will stay faithful to the very end of my life. If you're sitting here right now and you're going, why would you have someone to pray that for you? It's not a danger for me. I can't lose my salvation. I'm eternally secure. That's true. Apostasy doesn't refer to losing your salvation. Nowhere does the Bible teach that a truly saved, born-again person can end up in hell. Jude makes this clear to a church infiltrated by false teachers. Look at verse 1. Jude, verse 1, he is just right at the very beginning. Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ and brother of James, to those who are called, beloved in God, and kept for Jesus Christ. So you are being kept, being protected. And notice the very end of the book, verse 24. He's talked to this church about false teaching. He's talked to them about what false teachers can do, talked to them about what the danger that they are actually in. But at the very end, book ending the very beginning and the very end, he makes this very powerful statement that Christians, that God's people are protected by God. Look at verse 24. Speaking of God, he says, now to him who is able to keep you from stumbling. He's able to present you blameless before the presence of his glory with great joy. Not just barely getting in, not just like, oh, I'm so glad I made it here. But notice you are in the presence of God with great joy. He's able to protect you and keep you and care for you and bring you to that moment. Okay? Now, running parallel to this idea in Jude is your need and my need to not engage in apostasy, to stay committed to the very end. Look at verse 20. After all the danger that they're in, notice how he puts it. Verse 20, but you, beloved, building yourselves up in your most holy faith and praying in the Holy Spirit, verse 21, keep yourselves in the love of God. Same word. Same word. Verse 1, verse 24, God is able to keep you from stumbling. Same word, verse 20, keep yourselves in the love of God. Too many Christians who love that they can't lose their salvation ignore our responsibility to persevere, to remain faithful followers of Jesus for our entire lives. Jesus put it this way, Matthew 10:22, Matthew 24:13, he, quote, who endures to the end will be saved. He who endures to the end. We need the warning of 1 Corinthians 10:12, quote, if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. I want you to see one more passage on this. So turn to Colossians chapter 1. Colossians chapter 1, page 1087 in the blue Bibles, 1087. Turn to this many times before because I think we forget these things. We go on autopilot when it comes to our commitments to Christ. We're like, okay, I'm good. I'm secure. I'm being kept by God. So everything's fine. I can take the foot off the pedal, off the gas pedal. I can coast. I can hang out in neutral. Like Galatians, Paul is reminding another church that is full of false teachers about the truth, and he warns them against apostasy. So he's reminding them of the truth of the gospel, and he's warning them against apostasy. Look at verse 21. And you, Colossians 1:21, and you, who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death. So you are reconciled. You and God are no longer at war. You are at peace. He did that in the body of his flesh by his death. He did that in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. The sentence doesn't end though. What does it say in verse 23? If indeed, that word indeed means focus on this. This is important. I'm putting this word in for emphasis. If indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel. So apostasy, shifting, not being stable, not standing firm is a danger that the writers in the New Testament knew that the Christians were under. That it was a danger, it was a disaster that could happen to them. So to fight against this in Galatians, Paul has been making a multifaceted, knockdown, drag-out argument. It starts in chapter 1, verse 6. It concludes in chapter 4, verse 7. Just argument after argument after argument to make this one point. Well, turn back to Galatians chapter 4. He is attacking these false teachers at every possible angle. This is something. Now, I guess let me put it this way. Paul didn't say, well, they're saved and they're secure, and so, God, they'll figure it out. They're fine. They made a profession, and, eventually it'll all work out in the end because they're good. He is attacking this false teaching from every possible angle to keep these churches in Galatia from apostasy. So in this middle section of chapter 4, he's bringing his argument home to the Galatians. He would never say, well, they're saved, so God will protect them. Paul didn't use God's protection as an excuse for inaction. He tries to change their minds. He's arguing with them. He's pleading with them. He's begging with them. He sees them on the edge of the spiritual cliff of apostasy, and he's seeking to rip them back, pull them back with every possible argument he could think of. He's trying to win them back to the truth. And verses 8 to 11 gives us one example for how to do that. Look back at verse 8. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. So Paul starts by reminding them of their BC days, their days before they were saved. If you look at the text, that word formerly, as in before they were redeemed, before they were adopted, verse 5, before the Spirit came to live inside of them as evidence that they were saved, as evidence that they would one day receive their inheritance. Before they had that, before they were saved, they, look at the text, did not know God. According to Romans 1, all people everywhere know about the God of the Bible, but they don't know him. They know he exists, but they don't honor him. They don't worship him. They reject him for idols. They don't have a father-son relationship with God like Paul has been describing here at the beginning of chapter 4. They're without God in the world. They're alienated from the eternal life that God gives. Rather than knowing and loving and serving the one true God, they are, look at the text, enslaved to those that are by nature not God's. What are those things? Those are demons. Those are demons, and through the myriad of lies that demons spread all over the world, people are enslaved. So to win these Galatians back from the brink of apostasy, Paul reminds them of their BC days. So if we're going to be protected from apostasy, if you and I, if we're going to be protected from that, then point number one, you and I should admit the slavery of our BC days. Admit the slavery of your BC days. BC meaning before Christ. Too many Christians, maybe you've heard this, maybe you've done this. Too many Christians reminisce about their BC days. Like not knowing God and being slave to demons were the good old days. And talk about their past life like that was the best of times, and today, now that they're saved and now that they know God, today is the worst of times. That's a recipe for apostasy. So the Bible takes our blinders off and says, no, let me remind you of what those days really were. The fact of the matter is, before Christ, people are slaves. We have no freedom. We have no choice. And I want you to see this. I don't want you to just believe me. Turn to John chapter 8. John chapter 8, page 991. John chapter 8, page 991 in the blue Bibles. John chapter 8, Jesus is talking. And he's talking to a group of people that it says in chapter 8, verse 31, believe in him. So he's talking to people that have heard his preaching and they've been attracted to his preaching. They've thought, okay, I want to know more. I believe in you. But notice that their belief does not lead to eternal life. Look at John chapter 8, verse 31. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So there's our idea of abiding, remaining, staying, not deviating, not leaving. He says, if you do that, if you stay, abide in my word, you stay committed to my truth, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. They're a little confused by this, and so they respond. Verse 33, we are offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free? So look back at their history, which I think they kind of forgot all about Egypt there. But 430 years of slavery. But we've never been enslaved to anybody. And Jesus, look at Jesus' response. He answers this with, I'm not talking about physical slavery, verse 34. Truly, truly, I say to you, which means this is truth. This is significant truth. This is truly, truly, very true. Everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. Notice what Jesus says about lost people, non-Christians. Everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The son remains forever. So if the son sets you free, you will be free indeed. The key word that I want you to focus on is there in verse 34, slaves to sin. That's what we are apart from Christ. That's what we were in our BC days. We were slaves to sin. It may not have felt like it. It may not have looked like it, but that is what we were according to Jesus' words here. And one more passage. Turn to 2 Timothy chapter 2. 2 Timothy chapter 2. That is page 1098. 1098. So here's Paul, and he's talking to he's talking to his son in the faith, Timothy. Timothy is the pastor of the church of Ephesus. So he's talking to Timothy, but he's also talking to the church of Ephesus through Timothy. And he's saying, here, Timothy, here is what a good pastor does. This is what a good pastor is. This is how you know you're on the track to being a good pastor, Timothy. Look at the end of 2 Timothy chapter 2. Let's start in verse 24. Here's a good pastor. The Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents. So now opponents becomes the main idea. Correcting his opponents to God's servant, opponents to sound teaching, opponents to a solid pastor, correcting his opponents with gentleness. God may perhaps grant them, the opponents, repentance, leading to the knowledge of the truth, and they, the opponents, may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. So how does Paul describe the non-Christians that Timothy will be opposed by? He says that they are trapped. That's what that word snare means. It's a trap. They are captured. They are enslaved to Satan. So this is the truth about our BC days. We were slaves. We were slaves to sin. We had no ability not to sin. We were only free to sin. We were wholeheartedly committed to sin, whether we knew it or not. That's what we were doing. And on top of that, we were slaves to Satan, trapped like caged animals. So that, what does the text say? We are trapped by him to do his will, not God's. So if you haven't done so already, can we reinterpret our BC days with this kind of slavery in mind? All of you had slavery as part of your BC days. None of you here were born free. We were all born slaves. Slaves to sin, slaves to Satan. You may have known about God, but you didn't know him. Those good times were expressions of slavery to sin. If God hadn't rescued us, if Jesus hadn't redeemed us out of slavery, if he hadn't made us free, we would still be living in an invisible prison. Sin would be our crime, condemnation, our sentence, Satan, our warden, and eternal execution, our assured future. And that would be what we are. We wouldn't even know that we were in the prison. But that's where we would be. Those were our BC days. And what Paul is doing by reminding them of this is extremely critical, because he's going to now point out the insanity of this whole thing. The Galatians were well on their way to being re-enslaved. So turn back to Galatians 4. He's reminding them, this is what you were. This is what life was like before Jesus showed up and saved you. Before you heard the message of the gospel that you cannot be saved by anything but Jesus alone. Your good works, your baptism, your rituals, all of that stuff can't save you. All that saves you is Jesus alone. So just trust in him. Before you heard that, you were slaves. And now notice what he says, Galatians 4, drop down to verse 9. But now that you've come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world whose slaves you want to be once more? So in contrast to the past is their presence. Those words, but now in verse 9 speak of a new day. It speaks of salvation, but now speaks of freedom. You're no longer slaves. You're now free. But now is their new life in Christ. It's marked, notice in verse 9, by a relationship with God. They have come to know God. We may not think about it like this, but knowing God is standard New Testament language for being saved. Listen to Jesus, John 17:3. This is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you've sent. So here's what's happened. Galatians 4:5 and 4:6. They've been adopted into God's family. They have, according to verse 6, the intimacy of a father-son relationship. It is so close that they are able to call the God of the universe, the creator of all things, they're able to call him Abba, Papa, Daddy, without any sense of disrespect, but with utter and complete closeness. They experience his closeness. They know what it means to be close to God. His love for them is not some abstract philosophical principle. It is personally real to them. This isn't about what they know. This is about who they know. So to be saved is to know God, but it's more than that. Look back at verse 9. It's more than that you have come to know God. Rather, you've come to be known by God. Paul wasn't correcting himself there. He's qualifying his statement to make sure that they remember the correct order. Christians know God because he knew them first. Christianity is more than about who you know. It's about who knows you. And just like before, it's not that God knew about them. God knows about everything. That's not what that word means. That word know is the same. It's the same at the beginning, in the middle of this verse. It's the same in verse 8. It speaks of intimacy and closeness. He knows them. Before their response was God's initiative. Before their choice for God, he chose them. He knew them. They knew him because he knew them. Or like 1 John 4:19 says, we love because he first loved us. It's true in Christ we've come to know God, but according to Jesus in John 10, he knows his own, and then he gives them eternal life. This goes back to adoption. Look at chapter 4, verse 5. Jesus came, he's born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who are under the law so that we might receive adoption. Think about adoption. God choosing sons to make them heirs of the family estate. He knows them. He loves them. He sets his affection on them first, and then completely apart from their works, their desires, their inclinations, God adopts them into his family. In the face of adoption, in the face of this relational, personal, family intimacy with the God of the universe because of the death and resurrection of Jesus, in the face of all of those blessings, the Galatians are flirting with trading all of that to become slaves. Look back at verse 9. You know God. God knows you. How can you turn back again? How can you go back? Paul is astonished. He's angry. He's perplexed. He's confused. He's mourning all at the same time. How could they leave Christ? And then you know what their response would be? I'm not leaving Christ. I believe in Christ. I'm just adding a little Judaism to Christ. To which Paul would say, to add anything to Christ is to leave Christ. It's to deconvert. In fact, it's paganism because it's the worship of demons. Notice what Paul is saying here. We read it quickly and we don't really see what's being said. Notice, Paul is saying Jesus plus Judaism, Jesus plus baptism, Jesus plus good works, Jesus plus anything is a return to slavery, notice, to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world. Those are demons. Demonic forces are behind the lie that says Jesus is not enough to save me. Christ is not enough for me. I don't have everything I need in him. I need more. I need to get baptized. I need to serve. I need to do this. I need to do all of these things. I need to amass a bunch of good works just in case Jesus isn't enough or because he's not enough. And all of that, Paul's saying, no. That's paganism. That's what every other religion on the planet, that's what every non-religion on the planet is doing. That is not what you do to be saved. You don't need to supplement Jesus with anything. So what Paul is doing is he's trying to help them see, Galatians, you're flirting with apostasy. You're in danger. So if you and I are going to be protected from that, then point number 2, you and I need to recognize it's insane to trade adoption for slavery. That's what Paul is doing with those words. How can you? He's pointing out the utter insanity of the choice that they're making. Think about Paul's argument in Galatians. Take a step back for a minute. If you're familiar with this book, if you've been with us since August, or even if you haven't, here's Paul's argument from Galatians. It is far more than salvation by faith alone. Paul starts in chapters 1 and 2 by saying this. He says, my message is supernatural. I didn't make this whole thing up. I received this message by a revelation from God. And when I met with the apostles that walked with Jesus, we had never met before. I preached my message. They preached their message. And it was the exact same message. He goes, my message is supernatural. It comes from God. It's not from me. His second part of his argument is, by faith in Jesus, you're justified. That's chapters 2 through 4. God's end times declaration that you are not just not guilty, but that you are righteous, that you have not committed one sin, that cases thrown out for lack of evidence that you'd broken even one law of God. You are 100% accepted by God. That declaration, when you stand before God, can be yours right now by faith in Jesus. Third, by faith in Jesus, you're redeemed. You're freed from slavery to sin, Satan, his demons, the slavery of their influence on your life. You're free from that. And then the fourth part of his argument, chapter 4, verse 5 is, by faith, you've been adopted into God's family. The judge is your father, the defense attorney, the emancipator from slavery is your brother. You are an heir. You are an owner of all things according to Romans 8:32. Everything that Jesus deserves, everything that Jesus has is yours. So that's his argument so far. You are accepted with God. You're not just forgiven. You're now part of the family. You are not even able to be unfamilied. You are a co-heir with Jesus. Everything he gets, which is all creation, is yours too. And you have a level of intimacy with the God of the universe that is unheard of, that is laughable, that no other religion would even get close to. You have the closeness, the love, the fellowship that only Jesus has. And so Paul says, so you're going to trade all of that to keep some laws, to keep some rules, and think that you need to do more than that? You think that you need to do more than what Jesus has already done for you? There is nothing more. You can't, there's no higher level after Jesus. Like, there's no one above him. He's God. Like, there's nowhere else to go. I once heard a Christian ask, could you be convinced that God doesn't exist? And this Christian's so wise. He said, that'd be like asking me if I could be convinced that my wife doesn't exist. He says, I know God like I know my wife. I have a relationship with her. I relate to him. I know him. I could never be convinced that he doesn't exist. So Paul's like, after recounting all these blessings, all these things that are already yours in Christ, the height of which is adoption, tell me again why you'd trade that in for slavery? So that some demonic forces could take you from freedom of adoption back into slavery. It's not possible to have it any better. He's given you everything but deity. He can't give you that because part of being deity is eternal, and you and I were born, so we're not eternal. He's like, it's very logical almost. He's like, put it like cost-benefit analysis on a legal pad. What they already had is better than anything they could possibly imagine. So tell me why going back to whatever you were before is better than what you already have. Tell me why adding your good works to Jesus will make you more accepted by God than Jesus is accepted by God. If you've been freed from slavery to sin and Satan by a Savior who loves you intimately, tell me why you'd return to the slave plantation. What could possibly be better there? If you've been adopted by a Father who knows you perfectly, who loves you infinitely, tell me why you'd return to the orphanage. There's nothing there for you that's better. No one would do that and be in their right minds. It's insane. And you can feel Paul's concern for the Galatians. This is not a doctor with a patient. He's at a safe distance. He's got his gloves on and his mask, so I'm not contaminated. He is with them in their flirting with defection. He is pleading with them, step back from the edge of the cliff. He's showing them the utter insanity of their decisions. And just saying, so let me get this straight. You went from a slave to being a son, and you want to be a slave again? We wonder who in their right mind would do that. But it's common for us to devalue Jesus and overvalue his competitors. I want to illustrate this by turning you to Exodus chapter 16. So turn to Exodus 16, second book of the Bible, page 64 in the blue Bibles. Exodus 16. Many people who come to church, many people who are saved, like these Galatians, many people follow the pattern that we see in the Israelites here in the book of Exodus. So let's just remember what's going on here. By the time we get to chapter 16, it's been 30 days, about 30 days since they left Egypt. Their last day in Egypt was the Passover. So their firstborn children lived while tens of thousands of firstborn Egyptian children were killed. Pharaoh has had enough. That's the 10th of the 10. It's the 10th of the 10 plagues. He's had enough. Get out of here. I'm done with you. And so they start to leave Egypt. But before they leave Egypt, do you remember what happens? All the Egyptians are so happy they're leaving. They're giving them all of their silver and gold. They're like, take all our gold with you. And so it says that they plundered the Egyptians as they left without killing anybody, without even fighting. So for about a week, they celebrate Passover. They celebrate the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And after about a week, the Egyptians go, wait a minute, we just lost all our slave labor. Like, what were we thinking here? So they start chasing after them. They go after them. Pharaoh, 600 charioteers, they're going to kill people, or they're going to bring them back as slaves. So we know what God does. He miraculously parts the Red Sea so that 1 to 2 million people can cross over to the other side safely. And then it takes the sea and destroys the army of the world superpower of the day in a matter of seconds. Then we get to Exodus 16. It's been about 2 or 3 weeks since all of that has happened. Okay, so they have all of that fresh in their memory. They've seen the 10 plagues. They've seen the Red Sea part. They've seen it swallow their enemy, an enemy they would have been no match for, an enemy they were terrified of. They've plundered the Egyptians without a fight. So they've seen all of those things. They've got all of this gold and silver that they didn't have before. Surely they would never trade God in to return to slavery, right? Exodus 16, look at verse 1. So it's 1 to 2 million people. They set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt. Why is that, guys? Because we sat by the meat pots. We ate bread to the full. For you brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger, didn't you? We look at that and we're like, that's so pathetic. It's just been a few weeks. And because they're a little hungry, they want to go back to their slavery. They started reinterpreting their slavery as a good thing. They started reminiscing about the good old days of being slaves all day, making bricks, not making enough bricks, getting beaten, all of that stuff, and going, but all of that was worth it because we were not hungry. A full belly was better than freedom. Now turn back to Galatians chapter 1. I wonder if anyone here is in the same place this morning. Think about the trade that you'd be making for apostasy. Infinite love and eternal happiness for what? The pleasures of sin for a while, a sense of intellectual superiority, a sense of freedom from God. Let me be clear. That's the most it would be, a sense. Because in reality, you wouldn't be free from anything. You'd be a slave. There's no freedom in immorality. There's no freedom in apostasy. There's only freedom in Jesus. To add anything to Jesus is idolatry. It creates a little g God who accepts your way of salvation instead of God's way, which is faith in Jesus alone. So nowhere does God say, I'm going to accept your baptism for salvation, or I'm going to accept your rituals for salvation. I'm going to accept your good works for salvation. To believe is to believe in a God who says, I save you by faith in my Son. Demonic forces in this world hate that message, So they throw out a bunch of false teachers all over the place. False teachers come into rooms like this and they slap hands and they become friendly in order to pull you away, just like these teachers in Galatia were seeking to pull the Christians away. They're working overtime to convince people to trade their adoption for slavery. And that's just insane. Now, in fact, these Galatians, their flirtation with apostasy is seen in the next verse. Look at verse 10. You observe days and months and seasons and years. So the context of Galatians makes it clear that these Galatians were following the Jewish calendar. They're following the weekly Sabbaths, the feast days, the festivals, the Jubilee years, which they must have been in. Some scholars say they were in the Jubilee year or had just come out of that Jubilee year. So that's how Paul could say that. So about the special days and seasons of the Jews, Paul says, Romans 14:5, one person esteems one day better than another, while another esteems all days alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. So what happens in Galatia is that these Christians had turned something optional into something necessary for salvation. That's a key thing. They take this optional thing, they turn the flexible into the mandatory for salvation. And then they imposed it on others, and they did this to try to make themselves right with God, to try to keep them right with God. And Paul equates that to returning to the paganism that they were a part of in their BC days. And you might be thinking, now wait a minute. So adding obedience to God's law to salvation in Jesus is equivalent to pagan idol worship? Really? It's equivalent to interacting with demons? Is that what Paul's really saying? I would say yes, it is. God's law, the rules in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Paul says Romans 7:12 are holy, right, and good. However, when people take those rules and they use those rules to make them saved or to keep them saved, even God's law, God's rules can be used by false teachers and the demonic forces behind false teachers to bind people and keep them from faith in Jesus. And that's what's happening here. These people are thinking it's really no big deal. Like I'm just Jesus plus circumcision, Jesus plus dietary laws, Jesus plus these daily, weekly, monthly, yearly observances. Like what's the big deal? It's really not that big a deal, is it? Paul says it's the difference between slavery and sonship. It's the difference between saved and not saved. And this just broke Paul's heart. Look at verse 11. He's not like, oh, this is just a minor difficulty you guys are having. You guys will get past this. Verse 11, I am afraid. I am afraid I may have labored over you in vain. For them to add works to faith was to abandon Christ. It was to deconvert. It was to apostatize. But here's the thing. He doesn't think they'd done so yet. But they were close. They were really close, and it tore his heart out. And we're going to see more of that next week. But he is terrified for their souls because he cares about them so much. Nothing makes a pastor happier than seeing people saved and people growing. And nothing destroys a pastor more than seeing those same people deviate and apostatize. That is the worst. It's like a parent who has spent all of their energy for multiple years pouring into their children the dangers of drug use, and then their kids get addicted to drugs. It's the terror of the Christian parent that has put their kids in kids ministry and youth group and Awana and family devotions and all of these things and just poured God's word into their life over and over and over again to see them leave. There is a terror inside Christian parents over that, right? And the same exact thing is true for pastors. As they act almost like parents over a congregation, and they pour their lives into the people, and they pour their teaching and discipleship into people to see them deviate, to see them leave. Right now in my mind, I'm seeing names. I'm seeing faces of people that I've done that with that have walked away and are still not back at this point. And Paul's going, you're flirting with disaster. You're flirting. I'm terrified for you. I work so hard. All of that could be in vain if you don't come back. If we are going to be protected from apostasy, then point number 3, simple point, but it's clear. We need to beware of those who use works to enslave. We need to beware of those who use works to enslave. Why? Because the Galatian heresy is still alive and well. It is alive and well outside the church, and it is alive and well inside the church. As I said earlier, as I showed you through surveys a couple months ago, most people in church today, most people that go to church every Sunday, most people that go to church once a year, it doesn't matter. Most people that go to church believe that they are saved by faith plus works. Most people, over 50% of people, and in some groups, over 80, almost 90% of people believe salvation is by faith plus works. This is why we have spent so much time drilling down into this truth. This is why it might feel to you like you've heard the same message multiple times, because you have. Because we don't learn it the first or the second or the 5th or the 20th. We need to hear it over and over and over and over again to drill it down so that we know the truth. But more than that, so that we get the truth right when we share it with other people. But more than that, so that what happened to the Galatians doesn't happen to you. So we drill down into these truths, so we know them, we mine them for as much truth as we can get out of them. Like I said at the outset, if apostasy was a threat to the Galatian churches, planted and taught by the Apostle Paul, it can happen to you and it can happen to me. You're in Galatians 4. Turn to Galatians 1. Let's not forget how this book started. Here's more evidence that they are flirting with apostasy. Galatians 1:6, I am astonished. So we've seen that he's fearful. We'll see next week he's perplexed. Here he is astonished that you are so quickly deserting him who called you in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another one, because there isn't another message of good news. All the other messages are bad news. But there are some who trouble you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. Remember, the false teachers in Galatia had open Bibles. Remember, the false teachers in Galatians based everything they said on the Bible. Just like today, false teachers on radio, TV, internet have open Bibles. They will knock on your doors with open Bibles. They will be in the break rooms at your jobs with open Bibles. They will be out at the lunch tables with open Bibles. Beware of the person with an open Bible who tells you you must believe in Jesus and earn your salvation through your good works. You might say, well, I'm safe. I know the Bible. I know truth. Good. But were you discipled by the Apostle Paul himself? The Galatians were, and they flirted with apostasy. The Corinthians were too, and they flirted with apostasy. The Ephesians, those Christians, they were also discipled by the Apostle Paul. They flirted with apostasy. The church in Thessalonica also started and discipled by Paul, flirted with apostasy. And the churches that James, Peter, John, and whoever wrote Hebrews, all of those churches flirted with apostasy. We sang a song this morning, No Turning Back. No turning back. What comes to your mind when you think no turning back, when you sang those words? Did anything come to your mind? What came to my mind was the words in Luke where Jesus just says 3 words, remember Lot's wife. Remember Lot's wife. He just says that and keeps going. But what did she do? She looked back. Do I really want to leave? Do I really want to make this break and go all the way out of Sodom? She looks back. One thing about Judas. Judas is proclaiming his loyalty to Jesus with the other disciples while secretly in his heart, where no one else knew, he already had a price that he would pay, that he would receive to trade Jesus in. Trading in Jesus, devaluing his soul. Consider these verses in light of what we talked about this morning. 1 Corinthians 10:12. Let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall into apostasy. 2 Peter 3:17. Take care that you are not carried away with the error of lawless people into apostasy. Hebrews 13:4. We have come to share in Christ if indeed we hold our original confidence firm to the end and don't apostatize. Now to close, look back at verses 9 and 11. There are two words in verses 9 and 11 of Galatians chapter 4 that there are these two words of hope hidden behind our English translations and hidden in these verb tenses. So verse 9, we're going to get a little nerdy to close here at the end, but verse 9, it says that Paul asked them, how can you turn back again? But a more literal translation would be this: how can you be turning back again? In other words, when it says turn back again, it seems like that turning is complete, but that's not what Paul is saying. He says that they're in process still, meaning that their final decision hadn't been made yet, meaning that there was still hope in this pastor's heart that they could be brought back. And then look at verse 11. Paul says, I am afraid. This word too is in the present tense. Meaning, I am afraid. I am being afraid because I'm seeing this process take place, and it's not like this process is over. But the deconversion had begun. They were flirting, but they weren't married to apostasy yet. They were heading towards the cliff. They weren't over it yet. Their final answer hadn't been decided yet, and so he writes the book of Galatians, and he says this word to pull them back. So for all of us here this morning, our talk about apostasy, our look at these 4 verses, it should cause us to redouble our efforts in our hearts to consider the sobering reality of flirting with apostasy. That danger isn't out there. That danger is right here. As a result, you and I, we should be redoubling our efforts to remind ourselves of the gospel. We should be redoubling our efforts to get into God's word, to see over and over again the grace and the love and the faith that we've been given as a gift, the adoption and the redemption that we have. We should be filling our thoughts and our hearts with that. We should be helping others do the same. For others, talking about this might have exposed the fact that you're flirting with apostasy. Talking about this might have exposed the fact that you might be thinking right now you're in a state of apostasy. Like the Galatians, maybe your deconversion has begun. But if you haven't gone over that cliff yet, then there's still a chance to repent. That's why Paul wrote this book to these people, because he knew there was still a chance. And there's still a chance for you. There's this pull away. And what we often think is that pull will just disappear one day and I won't have to fight it anymore. That's not what we've seen today. We've seen that the Christian life is one, enjoying the gospel. It is enjoying the salvation that is secure in Christ. And it is keeping ourselves in the love of God. It's not either or, it's both and. And as we do that, false teacher could come in here, could teach a whole bunch of heresy, and everyone here would go, I know who you are, get out of here. They'd jump into the growth groups, and you'd be like, I know you. I've seen your kind before. Get out of here. And you wouldn't need a pastor. You wouldn't need anybody. You would just know. You leave. You are a heretic. You are a false teacher. I see what you're doing. I'll end with this. I wasn't planning on telling you this, but we'll see what happens. I have another service to fix it if it doesn't work. So I was, my aunt and uncle live in Arcadia, California, if you know that area at all. And they asked me to come preach at their church. I was a young seminary student. I was probably about 25 years old. And so I'm preaching away on the grace of God. And this guy comes in the back about 5 minutes before the service is over. And I noticed him, and I thought, well, maybe he was part of the kids ministry and he was doing that. And then he came in at the very end. And so then I noticed him, but I keep preaching and I end the service and shaking hands at the door like I do here. And this guy started talking to me. Like, okay, great. So I'm talking to him, and he seems kind of strange, but Christians are strange too. I'm strange, so that's just the way it goes. Paul says, not many noble, and so forth. And so it's like, okay. And so I'm talking, but as I'm talking with him, he starts making these mistakes. They're just kind of weird in his comments. He says, yeah, so I really enjoyed what you had to say about me, God, this morning. I was like, well, did I hear that? Did I hear that just now? So he kept talking some more, and yeah, I really love being around my people. God's people. It's just so good. It's like, did I hear? No, I didn't hear that. So he does it like 5, 6, 7 times. So I'm a guest preacher. I only know my aunt and uncle and their 4 kids at this church. I don't know anybody else. So we're standing at the back door of the church. And I said, hey, could you walk with me? And I took him out to the parking lot. And we're talking back and forth, blah, blah, blah. And I said to him, sir, you made some statements that were just kind of strange. So I just got to ask you. This question might sound a little weird, but are you God? And he goes, why, yes. Yes, I am. I am God. I am one with the light. I'm one with this. I am all things and all this stuff. And I'm like, And he's holding a Gideon Bible in his hand. I was just like, yeah, I'm this and I'm that. I'm like, sir, can I see your Bible for a second? Oh, sure. Yes. This is your word, right? Yes, my word here. And so I get a little sarcastic in these moments. And so I get his Bible and I open it to the back. And if you have a Gideon Bible, the first thing says that all people have sinned. And I said, so is this true about you? And he goes, no, I've never sinned. I've never sinned before. I'm God. And at this point, I know I've got a false teacher on my hands. And so I said, sir, I really appreciate our time together, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I said, I'm not going to let you have any insight into this church, any access to this church. You are a false teacher, and there is no way in the world I'm going to let you anywhere near this place. And he went from the nicest, kindest man in that moment to, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to rip your guts out. I'm going to kill you right here. I'm going to leave you in a pool of blood. All kinds of colorful language I'm not giving you right now. Like I said, I get a little sarcastic. And so in that moment, I'm like, sir, you're angry. That means you're sinning. That means there's hope for you in Jesus. Like, repent of your sins. And so eventually, he's right in my face. He's excommunicating me from his church. I'm like, I don't want to be part of the church of Satan. I just want you to be saved, sir. And I'm waving my hands like, elders, does anybody else see this? What's going on here? Can you help a guy out? And so finally the elders come and they say, sir, you're going to have to leave. And he walks down the street. I'm telling you, what you see in Paul is in letter form protecting the sheep of this church, protecting them from something that he knows they don't know it, but that he knows will lead them to destruction. Even though they think, I'm fine. There's no problem. I'm safe. Paul's like, no, you're not. We need that kind of encouragement this morning. Let's pray. God, thank you for these reminders. Thank you for these truths. All of us this morning, we're here for a reason. You wanted us to hear that. Even if it was for just one part of one line, you wanted us to hear it. So God, help us as we leave here. May our commitments to you be strong and solid, stronger and more solid as a result of our time here this morning. May the thought of leaving you for anything be insane to us. I especially think of people college-aged and under, as they are being bombarded with so many temptations to defect from the Christ that they have heard about from their very beginnings as a person. Oh God, would you solidify them as a result of today? Would you solidify all of us? And would you turn those of us who are turning back who are beginning to walk away or who have walked away. Would you turn us, please? Return us to you. Deconvert us from that deconversion. Bring us back so we'd be close to you, as close as we would want our kids to be with us, as close as we hope one day our kids would be to us. Bring us closer back to you, our Father, our Abba, as a result of our time here this morning. Amen.